Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue looking at the science portion of the ACT, and hopefully we can increase your time and increase your score. What I'm talking about today is something known as annotating, okay, which is taking the task and marking it up, underlining, highlighting things as you go, and I'm also going to talk about strategic guessing, okay? So these are ways that you can increase your time by not having to reread the passages, and also a way to maybe make a better guess. Sometimes you just don't know what the answer is. Instead of a 25% chance of getting the question right, by doing some strategic guessing, you can take those odds up to like a 50. So you can double your chances of getting the question right. So thank you so much for making it today. We'll go ahead and get rolling and see what we're talking about today. So first of all, I wanted to talk about annotating, okay? One way you may be able to save some time is learning how to annotate. Okay, annotation is a skill that will need to be practiced so you learn the most important information to be annotated. Okay, this is not something you can just do the day of the test. You're going to need to, if you want to take advantage of this, you're going to have to practice doing it a couple times. Okay, this technique is most effective on the paper version of the ACT, but can be modified to the computer-based ACT. So make sure you know what you're walking into on test day. What I'm talking about today is mostly for the paper version, but if you know you're going to be taking the computer version of the ACT, that's fine too. We'll just kind of need to tweak some things, okay? So although students will need to return the paper test and booklet at the end of the test, its contents won't affect the score. So you can mark up in that test book as much as you want to. You can cross out answers, you can underline, you can highlight. That's not going to affect your score at the end of the day. They're just looking at the answer sheet. Okay, so don't feel like if you circle the wrong answer in the booklet that's going to affect your score. Don't even worry about that. Okay, you're going to turn the booklet in, but they're not even going to look at it. Okay? So more information about annotation. For the computer version of the test, a highlight feature can be used. So there's something you can do to highlight on the computer version of the test. The highlighting, though, only applies to a single item. When a student advances to the next item, the highlighting disappears. The student can still see the highlighting when they go back to the item. So this is something that you're going to need to practice. Again, when you move from one question to the next, that highlighting part is gone. You can still go back and see the part that you highlighted, but then you're going to be flipping in between the questions a lot. If that doesn't bother you, then that's okay. You don't have to worry about the ways to change it up. But if you think that that's making you waste time or you find it confusing, you can't remember where the highlighting information was, we might want to try something else out. Okay, and here's something we can do if that's not going to work for you. So for the computer version of the task, you might need to take notes on scratch paper. That might be the best way to do it. So you'll get a scratch sheet of paper and you can take some notes down while you're reading it, and that can kind of substitute for the annotation that I'm going to be talking about. Okay? So let's talk about how to use annotation with the different passage types. Okay, so knowing the type of passage you're working on will help with your annotation. So we've gone through and talked about the different passage types and how to identify them. Just as a quick overview, remember that the conflicting viewpoints is probably the easiest one to identify because there's only one on the science portion of the ACT, and it's the only one without tables or graphs or diagrams or pictures. So if it's just a wall of text, that's the conflicting viewpoints. Another type of passage is known as a data representation. There's two of these on the science portion of the ACT, and these are very, very short. They have the least amount of reading. And then the last one is the research summaries, and those are the ones that are kind of in the middle as far as length goes. Okay, so let's talk about data representation. These are the really, really short ones, and they often have tables or graphs to go along with them. So data representation passages focus on finding and comparing data. So scientific information such as whether an allele is dominant or recessive, what the pH is at the different variable intervals, as well as the charge, is it positive or negative? These are going to be the types of things that you get questions on, so those should be the things that you note or highlight or underline so that you don't have to go back and reread them. So if you get a data representation, if you're reading through it and it's telling you what all the different variables are, highlight them as you're reading them because you're probably going to get questions about them. If it is talking about two different versions of something, maybe you're reading about eukaryotic versus prokaryotic. Well, you're probably going to get questions to compare them, right? As well as things like, is it dominant or recessive, or is it a positive or a negative charge? So if you are reading a data representation, the really short passages, if you see that information coming up in the passage, it must be important because the data representation is only like 100 words. So they're going to pick their words very carefully. So if they're giving you things, like I said, positive or negative, dominant or recessive, almost like opposites of each other, go ahead and mark those up because you're probably going to get questions about them, and then you don't have to go back and reread it. You'll already have it highlighted. It'll be easier to find. Okay, so that's what we can do for the data representation. Let's talk about the research summaries. Okay, so research summaries, there are 3 of these on the science portion of the ACT. These are middle length, so they're not as short as the data representation. They're not as long as the conflicting viewpoints. Like the name suggests, research summaries, they are summarizing a real experiment that was done in the scientific community, and they're summarizing that research. Okay, these passage types focus on understanding experimental design, labeling variables, and the purpose of tools, as well as similarities between experiments. Okay, so if you're reading something, last time I saw y'all, we were looking at graphs, and some of the different graphs were very, very similar, and they only had maybe 1 or 2 things that were different about them. If you get to a research summary and see that, that's something you should be annotating or marking up because you're probably going to get questions about it. These research summary passage types love to ask questions on understanding experimental design. So why is the experiment set up the way that it is? Okay? So if you see something like that, or about different variables, as well as what tools or what lab equipment is being used, highlight that information because you're probably going to get questions about them, and that's going to save you some time. Okay? The last type of passage is known as conflicting viewpoints. There's only one of these. It's the longest one. These don't have tables or graphs or any pictures to go along with them, so they are just a wall of text. For these, the questions are going to focus on comparing the different viewpoints, just like the name would suggest. And so as you're reading through them, you want to note the differences and similarities between the viewpoints, and that's going to save you some time. So what you might want to do here is like pick 2 different colors, maybe green and red. Everything that the viewpoints have in common, you underline or highlight in green, and anything that is different about them, you highlight in red. And then that way, when you get to the questions, you're going to be asked questions about how they are different or similar. That way you don't have to go back and reread this big wall of text. You have all the information that you need there. So with the annotation, our goal is to, sometimes you're just going to have to read the passage, especially the conflicting viewpoints. There's no way around it. So you can save yourself time by knowing what to look for. And these are things that they're going to look for the conflicting viewpoints, is similarities and differences between the viewpoints. So if you go ahead and mark those up as you're reading them the first time, you're going to save yourself time by not having to reread the whole passage a second or a third time. Okay? So that is some information about annotation. I wanted to talk about strategic guessing really quickly. So for many students, guessing on the ACT is a necessity. Time management is simply the biggest factor most students struggle with. For me personally, I know that if that ACT was twice as long, I'd get almost all of them right. You know, it is mostly a time management thing. And so these are ways, you're going to have to guess at a certain point, most of us. And so these are things that you might want to keep in mind when you're making those guesses. Okay? So these are techniques to eliminate wrong answers. Okay? So what we're trying to do here If you've got 4 answer choices and you can't eliminate any of them, that's only a 25% chance of guessing correctly. But if you take those 4 answer choices and eliminate at least 2 of them, now you have a 50-50 shot of getting it right. So we've doubled your odds at answering the question correctly. So that's why this is called strategic guessing, is we're going to eliminate some wrong answers and make our odds a little bit better. So these are techniques that can greatly improve a student's ACT score. So let's talk about them. So the 2 main strategies to eliminate wrong answers. The first one is eliminating answers by using skills. For this, what we want to do is examine variables and trends. Like we were looking at for those previous graphs, it's very easy to identify on bar graphs and line graphs what the trend is. Is it a direct correlation? Is it an inverse correlation? Okay, well, if you see those correlations or if you see those trends, you're going to get asked questions about them. And so you can use that information to eliminate a couple of the wrong answers. Also examine the variables. Okay, so if we're using variables that did not appear in the passage type, they're probably the wrong ones. Okay, so that's how we can eliminate some answers by using skills. Okay, let's talk about eliminating answers based on information from the wrong source. So this happens a lot on the science portion of the ACT. If an answer uses a unit of measurement that does not appear in the reference table or figure, it is most likely not the answer. So if every graph you're looking at is talking about grams, and this one is grams, that one is grams, and the explanation is talking about grams, and then one of the answer choices is talking about liters, that's probably not the right answer. They're going to assume that you're really not examining it that closely. So make sure you look for all your different answer choices. Do they have all the same variables? Do they have all the same units, or are a couple of the units different from each other? If some of the units are different from each other, you can probably eliminate a couple of them just based off of the units that they're using. Okay, so again, make sure if the graphs are in liters that the answers are in liters, right? If there's a discrepancy there, you might be able to eliminate some of the incorrect answers. If an answer choice comes from the wrong graphic, it is most likely not the answer. We've been looking at a lot of these questions recently, and most of them tell you exactly where to look. They'll say, look at figure 1, examine figure 2, or consider it figure 3. If it tells you that, the answer has to come directly from where it told you to. That's just the way the ACT is set up. If it tells you to go look somewhere, the answer is not going to come from a different part of the passage. So we can use that to our advantage. Okay, if it tells you to go look at figure 2 and then some of the answer choices are based off of information in figure 3, they're not right. And you can eliminate those, and now you got a 50-50 shot at guessing correctly. Okay, so these are some things that you're going to need to practice in order to increase your odds and eliminate some of those wrong answers and increase your score a little bit. So y'all, thank you so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.